Hello, everyone. This is Ethan Evans, the Easy Coach. Welcome to our inaugural broadcast, where you can enjoy us sorting out last-minute technology problems. But leaving that aside, we're very excited to have our first ever broadcast and for all of you to join me here tonight. I'm Ethan Evans, as I mentioned, and our topic tonight is going to be about considering becoming a manager. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about my background in this topic in a second, but for those of you who have joined us, the way the broadcast works is I'll give a few of my introductory remarks and opinions, but we really depend on your questions. So if you haven't done this yet, you should see a little purple box that says the Easy Coach QA. And to be able to ask me a question, you need to go and create a Twitch account, which is free and just takes your email address, and you have to pick a screen name. And then you go back to that little box and you have to authorize it to know your name. And then you'll be able to ask me questions. And what we do is we take your questions in the order you supply them, and everyone watching can vote. So if you don't have a question, you can still look at the list of questions and vote on them. Now, the user interface here from the component we borrowed from somebody else is a little bit picky. To be able to vote, there's a tiny little up arrow next to the number. So all the questions right now have 50 points. And to upvote, you have to click on that little arrow, and then you can add 50 to any question you like for free. There's a thing where you can use virtual currency if you really want to vote a question really high. You have no need to do that. Just add your vote to the pile, and I'll answer them in order. So, with that as a background, tonight we're going to talk about considering becoming a manager and the transition from being an individual contributor to a manager. Both should you do it and why? What would you get out of it and how to do it well? With that in mind, I do have to issue my usual disclaimer, which is speaking here tonight, I represent only myself and my opinions, and I don't represent my employer, Amazon, or Twitch. And so I'm just speaking for me, but I hope you get some value out of it. Also, we do have a number of coaches and HR professionals we expect to drop by tonight. So if at any point you want to add to the discussion, or you want to ask one of them a question, or you want to disagree with my opinion, feel free to jump into chat. Also, if you have any questions about how the broadcast works, a couple of our helpful moderators are in chat and they can answer your questions. So with that, I hope some of you will go vote because the broadcast is driven by your questions. But let me go ahead and share with you, to begin with, how I became a manager. And this goes way back. Hi, Amazon Geek, great name. This goes way back to very early in my career. So I became a manager, as people from my college used to say, I sold out to the dark side very early. So in my very first job, I was working at a startup called 4 Systems. We did high-speed networking equipment. And I got a story I'd love to share. I got what I call a Klingon promotion. So hopefully there's a lot of Star Trek geek in the audience. Since we have Amazon Geek, maybe there's a good Star Trek geek there. But Klingon promotion, basically the person above me was decapitated. And there was suddenly a hole. So I had never really considered becoming a manager. But suddenly I was thrust into a leadership vacuum. And I wasn't called a manager right away. De facto, suddenly I was leading a team. And here I was, yeah, Rory, I've used Klingon promotion for a long time. So there I was leading a team. No experience, no background, no prior education in it. And I had to figure it out on the fly. And what I would share tonight, and why I wanted to do this broadcast, is I think that's probably the most common way that people end up. We just lost something. we're working on the broadcast behind the scenes. So, in any case, uh, the way we started things, um, the way we started is I had to learn on the fly. So, uh, what I'd share is I think that's normal. And I've done this talk, I've talked about becoming a manager in front of live audiences a number of times. And I always do a show of hands. How many people have formal management training of any kind? Do they have a business administration degree? I see people adding questions. Now we need to get people voting. Thank you. But do they have a business administration degree? Do they have an MBA? Were they in the military and had leadership training there? It's usually only 5 or 10% of people in management roles or considering them that have any kind of training. So this leads to the problem. How can you possibly be a good manager if you're untrained? And I think anyone considering going into management needs to think about that. And I see Parachas here, who I think is a coworker of mine. I think I recognize the name in chat, saying MBAs don't really teach managing people. And that's true. Business administration, MBAs, they don't really teach that skill, but they at least approximate it. They're closer to it with some organizational psychology or something that gets you a little bit closer than most people. As an engineer, believe me, I had no training in management. So given this, as you think about going into the career, my favorite question I would ask all of you to think about is why? Why do I want to do this? What is my driving reason? Because you may be a lawyer, you may be a designer, you may be a software developer. You've been trained to do something. Now suddenly you're going to set that partially aside, move completely away from being trained to do anything, doing anything for which you have training, and go explore this whole new area. And probably your training to this point is watching other managers and seeing what they do that you like, and just like parents say, I'm never going to be like my parents, saying I'm never going to be like that manager. But ask yourself why. Why do you want to go into leadership? Is it because you like helping people? Is it because you want to learn more? Is it because you like the power and control? Is it because someone at home is telling you, well, it's more respectable, you're going to be more important? And the reason knowing why matters is because you're going to have to teach yourself a whole new skill set. And so, having shared why I managed, how I became a manager, I had to figure out that why. And for me, my initial why was I loved human puzzles. In other words, I was a programmer, and I found that when I wrote a program, it might be hard, it might have bugs, but one day I'd get it working. People change every day. They come in every day with a different set of concerns. They get up on the wrong side of the bed. They have a great day. They have a terrible day. And so that's always moving. So for me, the why to go learn about management was to try to help solve that ever-evolving human puzzle. So that's a little bit of background and a question I think you can work with. Now I'll go ahead and take your questions. I see someone's voted one up. So the first question is, what does success look like for managers rather than individual contributors? Is it different, and if so, how? This is a great question. I appreciate it from Rory. So thank you, Rory. Question is, what does success look like? Well, that does depend a bit on the environment. And I encourage anybody who wants to jump in and chat and offer their own opinion, go crazy. But why people, how success is measured depends on your organization. That said, I think the key, and I think what Rory's driving at, that's a great point, is as an individual contributor, you're normally measured on your existing skills and what you yourself do. But as a manager, you're normally measured on what others do. And so the key difference is you have to start finding your success through the results of others. And your job becomes about enabling the success of others rather than creating the success yourself. So, with that in mind, from a success viewpoint, I think what you're looking at as a manager is how do you enable your team? And one of the hardest things, and I've talked to Rory about this before, it's a good prompt from him, is how are you going to learn to focus on enabling others? Because many first-time managers get in trouble jumping into their own, jumping in to solve the problems themselves. It's hard to move from your whole career being dependent on what you do to your whole career being dependent on how you delegate and what others do. So I definitely advise making that switch and thinking through how am I going to start focusing on delegation. So that's a big initial challenge, and I think you start to be measured on the success of your team. So that's my opinion on that. And hopefully you'll find that useful. If you consider becoming a manager, you have to switch modes between your own success and the success of your team. I'll go ahead and go to the next question. What made you want to become a manager? Well, as I already mentioned, I backed into it. But for better or for worse, I definitely liked the opportunity to have more influence. In other words, I could do a certain amount of work, but working with a team, we could tackle a lot more. And I jumped over sharing my career, but over time, I began managing a few people, and I grew to where ultimately, in a past job at Amazon, I was leading a team of over 800. So obviously 800 people can do a lot more than I can do alone. And I think that's one of the big attractions of leadership. And I use the word leadership separate from management. We can talk about that if people are interested. But becoming a manager really took me into the space of having the opportunity to see my work influence more than I could do alone. So I recommend that as one of the reasons to consider. Speaking a bit more about why your why matters so much, you do need to self-educate. And as you think about self-education, one of the tips I'd offer is figure out how you learn. Do you learn from others? Do you learn from reading? Do you learn from people like this in a coaching situation? And because you're going to need to learn over the course of several years, figuring out what's going to motivate you to self-educate to the level where you get good at leadership, good at management, being clear on that reason really matters. Now, Rory said, for more info on the first-time manager transition, a good book, Be the Boss Everyone Wants to Work For. I love this point. I don't know this book. Thanks for sharing it. I love this point because a stat I often share when I talk about this is I do a virtual show of hands. How many of you have ever had a bad boss? And usually when I do that, most people put their hands up. And the only people who don't put their hands up, usually their boss is sitting in the room and they're kind of looking sheepishly around. Even if they like that boss, it's awkward, right? Because if you put your hand up, you might mean them. So the point is, uh, most people have had a lousy boss, and that's a horrible experience. Well, the motive I think is important to really work on being a good manager if you're going to go down that path is not to be someone else's bad boss. And what I would say about that is it turns out that if you ask people 2 years after they quit a job, so if you go back to them 2 years after they're gone and ask them, hey, why did you leave that job? At the time, they may have said compensation, they may have said the work wasn't challenging, all kinds of things. You ask them 2 years later, 70% of them say, I left because of my direct manager. And one of the things I think about then is whenever anyone leaves my team, no matter what they're saying to me at the time or saying to HR, there's 70% chance they left because of me. And the same is true of most managers. So a lot of my motive and what I would ask anyone thinking about becoming a manager to consider is that bad boss you've had, you don't want to be that bad boss for someone else. And so that's a really good motive because it's hard. Maybe later I can tell a story of the first time I really screwed up someone's performance review and I lost that person forever. They were super angry. And I thought I was doing a great job. So maybe we'll come back to that. Question here, and anything I say, come back to. If you guys want to put it in and vote it up, I'm happy to tell the story. But we have another question here. What does success look like for managers rather than individual contributors? Okay, we've done that one. Staff, if you can clear out the couple questions we've already done. What do we have next? Let's see. What's the difference in role and responsibility between managers, directors, and vice presidents? Wow. Okay. So I've done all those jobs, and I've done them in both startups and big companies. And they're different across companies because I don't know the exact number, but at Amazon there are several hundred vice presidents, of which I'm one. And so it's a little bit different than in a small company. In the last couple startups I was in, there were like 5 of us. But I think we get a little bit into the discussion of what is management and what is leadership here. So we're talking about becoming a manager, and I'll answer the question in a second, but just to define terms, and this takes a little bit of thinking about, I believe. They say managers work in the system and leaders work on the system. So manager is looking at, are we delivering what we were asked for? And the leader is looking at, what should we deliver? Should we even be in this business? So, we got somebody who'd love to hear about the performance review I screwed up. I will do that next. So, answering this question about managers, directors, and vice presidents, as you go up between different levels, the balance shifts between working in the system to deliver the work product, whether that's widgets or software or business analytics, whatever it is your business does. Managers work more on making sure the team is organized to produce things, and leaders work more on what the team should be producing. And the biggest difference, I think, conceptually between the levels is you tend to switch from working on production to what's called production capacity, or what you're producing. That's a quote from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't read that book, it's excellent and talks about production and production capacity. Other differences, obviously size of the team. So directors typically bigger. Donkey Kong, I'm glad that worked for you. The other thing I would say, in a story I've told in other forums, since I keep baiting people into wanting to hear stories, when you make a mistake as a manager, you get a certain amount of responsibility, but the director and vice president above you get more of it. As you move up in level, there's less air cover, so if you screw something up, it's more and more on you. I once had a very senior leader, a senior vice president, come and tell me that he felt directors were the keepers of responsibility for the company and that they were entrusted with the judgment to keep the company out of trouble. And of course, this was in the context of where he felt I had not done that. So that'll make another good story later. I said for McKissick here that I'd go ahead and tell the story of the performance review I really screwed up. So I was a brand new manager in this role I talked about where I had gotten the Klingon promotion and the person above me was gone. This is back in Pittsburgh 25 years ago. And I had a really technically smart employee who had some shortcomings and, to be honest, some performance gaps. And I don't remember all those performance gaps now, but at the time I wrote a performance review and I wanted to be a good new manager. So I was very thorough and I'm like, these are the things you do really well. And these are some areas you can improve and how you can improve them. And I was so gung-ho because I had thought it all through and I sat down with this person and I told them, you do this really well and you do this really well. And here's something you don't do as well. And here's another thing you don't do as well. And by the way, here's a third thing you don't do as well. And here's all the ways I think you can improve. And it was very tone deaf. 25 years ago. Your math is off there, Washington Jeremy. Oh, I see the smiley. Okay, yes. So I was, in fact, a manager at 14. So thank you. That's very kind of you. Anyway, basically, I just pissed this guy off terribly. I alienated him because he was very happy doing his job. And in that case, because I was a manager at 14, or in fact, very early in my career, he happened to be older than I was. And we haven't talked about this, but I can touch a little bit on managing employees where there's an age difference. I was a young buck coming in and saying, hey, I'm so smart and I have ways to fix your life and let me list them for you. And that was extremely unwelcome. So, again, I no longer remember all the feedback. Probably to this day, if you showed it to me, I'd think, well, that feedback was right, but it wasn't useful. And it was so tone deaf to where that employee was and what he could hear that I ruined the relationship. And he spent the next couple years undermining me. And that wasn't the best thing for him to do, but being very clear, I earned it. And so that was a really painful lesson because I basically had a very popular employee or a relatively popular employee who was around telling people what an idiot I was with some validity. So you learn best from the hardest lessons, and I learned that one the hard way. So that's the story, McKissick, and that's kind of how I completely destroyed that relationship. And so I've learned from it, and I feel very sorry that I did that, but that's actually the point for new managers. You can be well-intentioned and hardworking, but you don't have necessarily the skills. Maybe before we go to the next question, we should talk a little bit about what are some of the skills that make a good manager. And I know we have a lot of people in chat who have opinions on this. If you want to add to my list, feel free. This is like a best of. But the number one skill, I think, in the end, is motivation and passion to help people, to work with people, because you're going to have all kinds of people that you need to work across. And I kind of call this my chameleon theory of management. Some of the people who are friends of mine hanging out in the channel have heard this from me before. But for any two people to interface, maybe you magically see eye to eye at instant one. But if you have different working styles, the truth is somebody has to adapt. So maybe I talk too quickly, or I know I use my hands a lot, and maybe that's a distraction for somebody else. Or you can be more serious. Maybe in my case, we know, I'm very blunt. And some people don't like blunt, or they don't like big and loud. And I'm both of those things. So in a management situation, one of us has to adapt. So either the other person has to deal with me being big and loud, or I need to tone it down when working with someone for whom that's not a comfortable style. And what I say is the chameleon gets really good at changing their style and fitting in with others in order to enable communication. So, one thing I would say for anyone considering leadership, management, you've probably got to want to work on that, because the alternative is, damn it, everybody's going to like me the way I am and they're going to deal with me the way I am. And that's really going to thin out the number of people who want to work for you for very long. You will end up with a set of people for whom your style is natural, and you will end up with a set of unhappy people who are sticking it out for whatever reason, but I wouldn't encourage that. Other good stuff for management: being an expert in your field, so that if you're managing a set of people in software development, in law, whatever, that you can mentor them and that you have skills, that you can help them and earn their respect. Being a good communicator. A lot of management is leading upward and to the sides. One of the things that was pointed out to me by a friend before the broadcast was, if you need to lead a large number of people, if you get into a management position, you change from an individual contributor, kind of has to be nice to their peers and keep their boss happy. But a manager has this 360 scope. Managers have managers, they have a lot of peers, and they have teams, and so they're surrounded, and you got to like doing that. The other thing that was said humorously when we were researching some topics for this broadcast is you got to have a hefty tolerance for meetings. Probably everybody in modern professional work thinks they have too many meetings. But managers' lives, and particularly someone asked earlier, directors and VPs, life is meetings. And at least in my case, usually my day begins with a meeting. I have meetings all day, maybe with enough chance to grab lunch, and it ends with meetings, and any other work I'm going to do, I do outside. And sometimes those meetings are half-hour meetings, and so I can have 16 or 18 different meetings in a day, and that is kind of my definition of hell. So hopefully I've got a big team. That's kind of what I've opted into. And that also reflects maybe I'm not the best at managing my calendar. I'm imperfect. But you've got to like to be in administration. A huge part of being a manager is administration. So what do you get? You get influence, and you get to help other people be successful, and you get to be part of bigger, more influential conversations. And the price of that is you're going to spend a lot of time in rooms talking to other people. So if you like that and you like to influence other people and to spend time in those rooms trying to get things done, great. And if you want to be left alone, management may not be for you. Let me take another question. And that question is, what did your manager do to help you be successful? Where did he let you fail? Where did he jump in? Great question. Thank you. That's an excellent question. So this is a really difficult topic. When I think back to my first manager was very live and let live, and didn't give me that much help. But I quickly got a second manager, and that was just a natural transition. No more Klingon promotions. And my second manager, she invested a lot. And my learning style was to talk with people, so I would spend a lot of time in her office getting advice. How do I handle this? How do I handle that? That mentoring relationship from my manager really helped me. And I definitely encourage you, if you have the choice of when to go into management, do it with someone who's going to really invest in you, going to help you, that you feel supported. Now, you can do it all on your own, but that's a great opportunity. And what she did was she had a lot of experience, and she set me up for things a little more. And she also gave me really harsh feedback, That sounds bad. She gave me very strong and direct feedback when I did fail. I got into a situation where I was enjoying being a manager and I wanted all the best projects because why not? I was being greedy. And at one point, I was basically trying to pull away a good project from someone else. And that was a shitty thing for me to be doing. But she called me on it and she's like, look, what are you doing? You have good work. This is somebody else's project. They're doing hard work. And they're doing great. So basically, stop it, sit down, and go back to your own job. So what I would say about that is a manager helped me with really good feedback. And I think getting honest feedback from a manager is really important because you're not going to know how you're doing. And the people working for you may not be comfortable sharing that with you. And so I would say the question was, what did my manager do to help me be successful? She gave me incrementally bigger projects and she gave me good feedback. But where she let me fail, she then gave me feedback of how I had failed. And didn't hold it against me. Another story there that's a little bit painful. Our company, this first company I worked for, did go through a layoff. And it was a small layoff. It was, by layoff terms, minuscule. 4% of the staff, if I recall. So one of the people being laid off, though, was my best man. So I had gotten married. My best man worked at the same company with us. A lot of our friends worked there. And my best man was on my team. And she told me, hey, we're going to do a layoff. I think he may have been on an adjacent team, but he worked very closely with me. And she said, but you can't tell anybody. Well, boy, did I screw that up. My thought immediately was like, it's my best man and my team. And nobody, I now remember the situation better. My best man was in the adjacent team. I really want to tell him. Nobody in my team is getting laid off. I want to let them know it's happening. And that that none of them are affected. And of course, I've just been told by my very good boss, here's some information for you, can't tell anyone. Wow. I decide, I know better. I'm going to get my team together and tell them they're okay. So I grab my right-hand man and I tell him, hey, go get everyone. Get them in a conference room. I need to talk to them. Shh. So he runs off to do this. We get in this conference room. There's like 8 of us, 6 of us, small team. And I say, hey, I just learned we're going to have a layoff. And I want to let all of you know it's secret, but you're all going to be safe. So just, and I'm like 2 minutes into this, my boss walks in the door. So somehow it went from like, don't tell anyone, to, hey, go round everyone up, to me starting to talk to him, to my boss finding out and being in the room, like that. And so here I am, like holding the bag, like I'm talking to everybody, and she walks in the room, and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" I could talk about how the leak happened, but basically someone else saw my guy rounding people up in a hurry, and it's like, what's going on? And started saying, Ethan's gathering everyone. Must be something going on. So, of course, my boss was like, 1 and 1 is 2 here. I just told him, don't tell anybody. So she could have kicked me, could have added me to the layoff really easily. She didn't. And that's an example of letting me fail, but I got a big lesson in why that was a bad idea and that I had broken her trust. And she was very gracious. She said, I get why you wanted to do that, but it was still a bad idea and you can't do that. And to make things fun, my best man had car trouble. He was out of town, and he didn't get back to the office till the next day. And so we've laid everyone off. And here he comes rolling in the office all alone to be like the last guy laid off. So rough day for him. All right, I see we're cutting through the questions here. Good audience. I know there's a lot of you out there now. please go ahead. I haven't explained this in a minute. So if you want to add to the questions or upvote them, there should be a box on your screen that says the Easy Coach Q&A. To use that, you click on it. You're going to have to make a Twitch account. That's free and only takes a minute or two. And then you can come back to this widget and click Let's Go, and it'll ask you to authorize it. That just lets me know your name, your screen name, not your real name. And then you can vote on questions. And to vote on questions, this user interface is a little bit clunky. There's a tiny little up arrow next to the numbers. You click on that minuscule up arrow, and you can add 50 points to any question for free. Now, there's a virtual currency interface where you can spend money if you really want to make sure I answer a particular question and jump all over it. You don't need to do that. But I see some of you now voting on questions, and I really appreciate that because it makes sure that I'm talking about the things that are most important to you. I see Life Coach 724 has a horrible flu. I'm really sorry to hear that. This is a good friend of mine. His real name's David. David, I'm sorry to hear you're sick. So let me take the next question. I've heard many people differentiate leadership and management, but no consistent answers. What's your take? So I did give a definition earlier, which is kind of the best one I've personally heard, which is managers work in the system and leaders work on the system. So it is a very interesting topic. All managers are leaders. Almost all leaders are managers as well. Another good friend of mine, an elfin plate, says he has the flu too. So I'm sorry for both of you. Please stay far from me. Now, one of you lives far away, so that'll be easy, but I hope you both feel better soon. And late season flus are the worst because you've almost gotten through winter and you're going to escape, and then boom. So leadership and management, they're always blended together. There's no perfect definition I've ever seen to cut them apart, and all jobs are a little bit of both. I believe the extreme of management, strictly speaking, like the definition of management, is about organizing people and work to try to get something done. And I believe that leadership is about trying to figure out what to do. So if you have to pull them strictly apart, management is about getting something that's basically agreed to done more efficiently, done better, done with higher quality, done faster. Leadership is about figuring out what to do and what systems or tools would make doing things easier. Life coach, please don't bring me your flu. Nor the 300 other people on the plane. That's mean. Sorry, this is a big problem I should have noted. I forget about this, McKissick. The Q&A generally only works through the web interface. And this, by the way, is a limit of some of the technology used. We're going to see if we can get that improved in the future, but it's a problem. And so there are a couple ways around that. One is if you want to vote, please watch through the web. The second way is if there's a question you really want me to lean into, you can add your vote in chat and I'll at least know. And the third way is you can probably load Twitch in the mobile browser real quick and vote on the questions. But this is something we'll work on solving for next week. It gives me a good, it says QA is iffy on Android. I could submit a question and it said it's pending approval. Well, that's not iffy. We can go get that approved. All the questions go through a filter. My moderation team here in the room says they don't see a question pending though, Fibu. So if you want to tell us what your question was, maybe it's approved, or maybe, as you say, the interface is iffy. If that's the case, put it in chat and we'll put it in manually from this end. And so Shadow Fox does say it's there pending. So folks in the room here, so we'll go ahead and get that approved. Thank you, Shadow Fox. Going back to the question, though, I think Rory's added here. I like the working in versus working on distinction. That's one of the simplest ways I've heard to frame the difference. That's why I use that, is it's the simplest I've heard as well. There is that unfortunate story about pornography and the judge who said, for pornography, I'll know it when I see it. I'm not exactly sure how you more carefully define what is management and what is leadership. Okay, so I'm glad you guys are discussing how to ask questions and vote on them. I'm sorry for some of the technology problems. I need a more pronounceable handle, but it's fun to watch and try you say Fibu. Yeah, well, it's true. The names here, it's also funny. Sometimes I know who the people are, and I'm not sure whether to call them by their real name or by their screen name. I use screen names because if you're here, you may want to be anonymous. Jumping down in questions, I'm glad you folks are putting in more. If someone doesn't deal well with conflict, can they still be a successful manager? Tough question. I think conflict is part of any career at some level. But in a manager role, I think if you can't sometimes work with conflict, you're gonna have a lot of problems. Not because conflict is inherent in it, but there are hard discussions you need to have. So I shared a story earlier of having doing a poor job giving a decent employee a performance review where I gave too much feedback, negative feedback, and he resented it. But sometimes you have to give people harsh messages, and sometimes you need to stick up for your team when someone else is trying to steamroll them. So look, if you're a great diplomat, maybe you can usually do that without conflict. But I definitely think as a manager, there may be situations where you are thrust in to really hard situations. Hey, Scott, glad to have you here. Thanks for stopping by. So, it's really hard to be successful as a manager if you're truly conflict averse, because I think one of the main things, and you can think about this for yourself, if you're an employee, people are looking for you to step up and have their backs. And so I think you got to be able to do that if conflict comes to you and to your team. Oh, thanks for the bits, BoardWorks. Those all go to our costs here, and then after our costs, they'll probably go to one of the charities listed on my website. By the way, I haven't mentioned that yet. Most of you may be following our associated website where we post all of these videos after the fact. That's theeasycoach.com. We turn every video we do here into a YouTube video as well as a podcast. So if you have friends who miss us here, if you have friends who miss this show and you think part or all of my answers to something would help them, feel free to point them to the YouTube and to follow us at our website, theeasycoach.com. And yes, anyone here who chooses to donate, what I do goes to the Washington Trails Association, where I'm on the board of directors. And so that's off topic, but if there's anything you do here, love it. All right. Okay, so next question. How do you inspire employees who lack the motivation to advance? Wow, Donkey Kong, you're hitting me with the good ones. I love these questions, by the way. I love things that are a little bit edgy. Keep them civil, but actually it's a lot more fun to discuss things that aren't just standard. So this is framed in a way that says the people may lack the motivation to advance. There can be other reasons. So the first thing to think about is if someone's not advancing, maybe talk to them about what they want to do. As you consider management and you go into management, one of the things that I realized is not everybody wants to follow in my path, but I have a bias Everyone has biases, but you naturally have a bias to think, well, my career is great, assuming you don't hate it, and it's really working out for me, so everyone should do what I'm doing. I will answer very directly, but you'll notice in my pattern of answering questions, I generally answer what else around the question, then the question. If you lack the motivation to advance, it may be that your definition of what you're expecting from that person isn't their definition of success. Their definition of success may be completely different. So, the first thing I would suggest is understand what success looks like to them. Now, I'm perfectly happy to take your question straight on. If you talk to someone and they either give you a definition or they don't have a definition or they're not following up on it, they say, oh, I really want to get better at this technology, or I really want to work on the Acme account, and you put them on the Acme account and they're still not doing things. That can be it can be true that they lack the motivation. So I think of all performance, and I bet Rory jumps in on this one. I think of all performance as a combination of motivation and skills. Because if people have the motivation and the skills, and you can add resources and some other things, but if people have the motivation and the skills, they generally can get the job done. So if they have the skills and it's not a skill problem, now it is motivation. There's a few things you can do for motivation. Number one, you can find out if there's any blockers. Is the person demotivated because they're going through a horrible divorce? Are they demotivated because of problems with their kids? I've had this situation where someone had a very sick child, child having deep problems. Their mind was elsewhere. Basically, with those things, you're looking for, is this a temporary problem? Or is this, and you're welcome, Redmond, go see the rest of the videos. Oh, thank you, BoardWorks. Good use of Twitch Prime. For those of you who don't know, Twitch Prime is a program I helped build. We can talk more about that another time. But and I'm distracted here. My crew is breaking into the next glass of wine. So they're getting ready to celebrate our first broadcast, which is awesome. In any case, where was I? I was talking about, nice, more bits. Thank you. People who lack the motivation to advance. So, and wine will help with that. It will either help with the motivation or the lack of motivation. This, I swear, inside here is water. I'm telling you all the truth. Look, motivation. People either have it inherently or you can help them get it, or some people, water, yep. Some people just, they're not into it. And those people I try to help find another job. So basically, I try to help them find their motivation. And if I can't do that, I try to help them find their motivation to find a different job. And if I can't do that, I try to help them find the door. And that's just honest, because you're trying to get something done on your team and you want to start with a helpful attitude about understanding. And if you can't do that, then you want to start with figuring out where they would be happier. And if beyond that, without being harsh, it becomes not your problem and they need to go find their own future somewhere else, because it's not your job to drag people through life, at least not in my viewpoint. So as for how to help people find their motivation, you have to have trust with them. You have to build trust that you're honestly trying to help them. And Parachas, I see you're +1. Thank you. You have to build trust with them. I do have a case from early in my career at Amazon where I was so lucky. I was working with a guy. He wasn't fitting in. And it wasn't working out. And I talked to him about it, and I finally said, look, this isn't working. Like, you're going to need to go. And in the exit survey, he wrote the nicest thing I could ever imagine of someone I had just fired. And the exit survey goes through HR, and he wrote, Ethan had the hard job of telling me I didn't fit and I had to leave. I thought, wow, that's sympathy. I'm the one telling you get out. So you can build that trust. To finish the question, for people who lack the motivation, there's only one other way to go about it. You can try and terrify them. Oh, I'm going to fire you. You can be threatening. You're going to lose your job. That might work in some place where they don't have other alternatives, but everything we're going to talk about here is positive management, at least at some level. And I don't think you can make people do good work under fear. There's a little bit of theory that like fear and power can get people to sort of do physical labor, like you can control their bodies, but controlling people's minds, if they don't want to work, they're not gonna. So it's a long wandering answer because I think it's a really complex topic. I see Rory's dropped into chat with, I think I invited him to. I think motivation is often a result of clear vision. That's a really good point, right? Another thing that distinguishes managers from leaders, leaders frequently cast visions and aren't content with only with what. There's a well-known book that Rory may be talking about here that says start with why. And basically, as a leader or a manager, don't focus so much on what and how. People want to know why they're being asked to do something. And if they don't buy into the why, they're not likely to be motivated. All right, next question is, what's one specific competency that someone should work on if they aspire to management roles? You limit me to one. I have this list. I think I said earlier, communication. Another one I would cite is organization. A lot of management is organizing people, resources, budgets, schedules. Empathy. That's from Scott, a former coworker of mine now at Microsoft. Yes, absolutely. Empathy is way up there. So let's see. I do think that's about building trust and relationship. I admit, you're always learning in this job. I recently had a revelation in my role, which is that having more empathy was in fact a way of getting more work done. Spending more time with people simply so they felt better about their jobs and they felt heard was creating motivation. And so spending time on helping them feel heard, feel connected, be in good relationship, feeling like their work mattered, made them work harder. And this is how I would think about this is assuming you're leading in a company where you depend on professionals and you depend on intellectual work of some kind, all the work you're getting from someone is voluntary. They're volunteering their effort and they're putting in the time. So, to get that voluntary effort, they have to want to give it. And so I think the most important management competency is eliciting that from your team. And then, well, I don't want to add an and that's part empathy, part communication, part vision. It's how are you going to lead? And we talked about becoming a manager, but really you have to be a leader as well. And that's why those two terms get used together. By the way, I often give book recommendations. If there's a book that is very short on this topic, you can read if you are considering it. It's called The 1 Minute Manager. It's a classic from Ken Blanchard. And I think if you haven't read The 1 Minute Manager and you're either a new manager or you're thinking about it, you should absolutely read that book. It'll take you maybe only an hour. It does take more than 1 minute because it's about how you can be a manager of someone in a minute a day. Okay, what's your short list of recommended must-read books? Well, there you go. I just answered that in part. The other book I really like on this is called Peopleware by DeMarco and Lister. So that's a little bit dated, but it's about setting up the environment. So, like software, hardware, peopleware. It's about all the things that can be disablers about an environment. If people are unhappy with their benefits, or if they don't have the right tools and systems, nothing is more frustrating than trying to get your work done and being blocked by circumstances. If you want to go for really advanced reading, there's a book that was given to me by Life Coach 724, who's down with the flu. And that book is by the Arbinger Institute and is called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it's really about how a lot of the problems that we put on others, we engender ourselves because we tell ourselves an internal narrative, and that narrative leaks through. So this is a case where we're really pushing people to do something maybe, and we have all these reasons that we're like enticing them and arguing with them or trying to convince them, but they feel manipulated. And so the key thing in leadership and self-deception, and why I recommend this book so highly, and would be my number one, it'd be my number one book to go look at, if you want advanced reading and you've studied on this topic, as I know several people here have. Leadership and self-deception is really about the idea that when we treat other people as objects, they feel it. So when you're trying to work with someone to manage them, and this works with peers as well, when you're working with anyone, if you see them as a human with their own needs, their own goals, their own personality, they will feel that. You've probably heard, many of you heard, only about 7% of communication is verbal, is the words you use. Everything else is visual, body language, tone, inflection. And that's why I like doing this format where you can see me and I can gesture, which I know I do a lot. We could see if I could do the talk with my hands in my pocket. We'll see how long I last. I give myself 60 seconds, and that's a maybe. But we'll try it. It'll be fun. So I'm watching the timer here, by the way. We'll see if I get through 60 seconds. So if you take away body language, you lose that. But the point in leadership and self-deception is when I start teaching, when I start talking to someone, I'm either viewing them as a human who I want to relate to, or I'm viewing them as an obstacle to my progress. And if I come to you and I say, I need your help with XYZ project, 7% of what you're going to get is the words, and the rest of it is my attitude. And so if I really mean, hey, how can we work together, blah, 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 and how can I meet your goals, and I'm cooperative, and I really want to help you be successful, and I ask a question like, on the XYZ project, I'm frustrating people with my hands in my pocket, but I made my minute, and that's really important. I did it. I watched and I waited my full minute. So now we're back to all I do. Point is, if I treat you like an obstacle and I'm just trying to overcome you, you will feel that. And no matter what words I've used, you'll inherently resist. Whereas if I'm treating you like a partner and a person, you'll inherently work with me. And if you just think about this in your own life, there are those really nice people who you'll bend over backwards for because they're nice to you. And there's really difficult people that even if they came to you dying in the desert and asked for a glass of water, if they asked for a glass of water, you'd be like, yee, so I'll get back to you on that. Leadership and self-deception. All right, there's a bunch of stuff coming through chat. I love it. It's good to get a little more insight into what managers need and do, even though I have no desire to enter their ranks. You are welcome. Good question, by the way, is why do managers do what they do? If you understand what we do and why, probably will be easier to understand. It is not our job to be, it is not our job to be, we're not trying to be opaque. The stream keeps showing change the battery. New problem, never had that one before. We've done several test streams. We're almost done with the stream for tonight. So turns out the camera is plugged in and not running on battery. Or if the stream suddenly goes dark, apparently it was on battery and we don't know, in which case I'm sorry when we say goodbye. But we will get that fixed. Technical problem. Got 2 thumbs up. We don't know what's going on, but we do have power. One takeaway from a recent course was the trust equation. It resonated. Trust is credibility, reliability, engagement over self-orientation. That divisor was an eye-opener. I couldn't agree more, Washington Jeremy. Self-orientation, that's the whole point about self-deception. If I'm trying to influence you or manage you while thinking about myself, you will know. For the love of God, get those hands out of your pocket. Yeah, well, I know that now. All right. Really was water. Scout's honor. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so there's all the comments. Thanks for sharing, Ethan. Boiler up. There you go. Okay. If more than one person is taking the next question, if more than one person on the team is vying for the Klingon promo, how does the winner succeed if the loser now working for them has hurt feelings? Oh, this is a good question. So in my case, the story I told at the beginning of the broadcast, for those of you who weren't here, was about getting what I call a Klingon promotion, where the person in front of me was removed. There weren't really any people vying for that job at that point. They, in fact, didn't want it. So fools rush in where angels fear to tread, and I was young and foolish. But answering the question, the real question here is if you're considering management, one of the tough things you can have to do is if you get moved up into a leadership role within your own team, suddenly people you had a peer relationship to are now working for you. And worse, if some of them wanted the same role, they may have resentment. They may wonder, why did you get that job rather than me? Or even more to the point, they may run around to the team and say, boy, I could have done that a lot better than so-and-so. This is a tough question. I love the tough questions. I think what you can do, and 40 Pink Dragons just summarize it actually, is you succeed by continuing to build trust with those folks and showing empathy. So first, be honest. I know you wanted this role. That isn't how it worked out, but I'd be happy to help you develop into a similar role in the future, or happy to help you move towards your goals together. Second, though, you have to own your role. This is what we do. And I've been moved into this role. The decision's been made. We can talk about it, but I need you to get on board with helping with the team mission. So I can help you get where you're going, but you have to get over this, process it, and focus on our work. Like, that's the trade-off. I'll help you, but you have to contribute. That's how I would set it up. If you have someone in the team who does turn out to be cancerous, I think you have to, if you can't resolve it, move them on. It's a little bit like the question asked earlier about if someone doesn't have the motivation to improve. If someone is carrying a grudge long term and they can't get past it, they have to, like I said, either improve where they are, you can help them find a new role apart from you where they'll feel less bitter, or they need to find their own way in the world. Most people at some time have been passed over for promotion. It's what I call a growing experience. Another thing you can do there, I wouldn't punt to this immediately, but someone made that choice. And if you have a good manager above you, they own why they made that choice. I would, without punting, I would point that person to them. And I would say, Fred or Mary or Aruna, whoever it is, you need to go talk to our mutual boss and ask her why she made the choice she did. What is she looking for in you? And I'm not saying punt on it or you don't own it, but I also think the manager above you needs to own that feedback. So that'll be a good litmus test for does your manager have your back? So we've gone past 7, which is fantastic. I'll take one more question here, and then we'll wrap up for tonight. I really appreciate everyone having come. I've seen go by in chat a few times, by the way, our links. I'll talk after I answer this last question, I'll talk about what we're doing next week. But this is now going to be an ongoing series. And so we're going to have one broadcast a week for a very long time. And different topics each week. And we'd love to have you give us some ideas about what topics you'd like to hear. But we also rely on you recommending our broadcast as well as our YouTube channel to other people so that this group grows. And you've been a really great chat tonight, offering your opinions, getting to know each other. I've seen some of my old friends greet each other, which is great. But a quote I love to share is that none of us are as smart as all of us. And so, yes, I'm the one here in front of the camera talking, but really collectively, those of you watching have way more experience and wisdom than I do. And so I'm hoping what this becomes is a channel where we all learn from each other. So I know there's decades of management and leadership experience in the chat tonight. There's decades of coaching and mentorship experience. And by asking questions and by offering your opinions, you make me smarter, which I appreciate, and you make all of us better. So with that, question here is, what do you find to be the most challenging part of being a manager? I haven't ever thought about that precisely, and I think thinking about it on the fly, it changes situationally. So sometimes I find the hardest thing the amount of work. A lot of times I find the hardest thing the amount of email and the amount of meetings. And then sometimes I find the hardest thing frustration when I don't see eye to eye with other people, where I feel like I'm trying to get something done and I'm trying to work towards a positive outcome, and someone else, for whatever maybe honestly held reason, is working at a counter outcome. And so that really tears me apart because I'm trying my best and I'm trying to reach out and I'm not successful connecting with every person. I have conflict with different people. And so what do I find hardest about being a manager also? As much as I do it, if we just talk about the manager part of, say, managing people and managing work, there's almost always too much work to get done. So you're always prioritizing and leaving out something you'd like to do. And there's giving hard feedback. I can do it. I do it, but I don't enjoy it. It's never fun to go to someone and tell them, look, the work you're doing right now isn't what we need. I love when I can do that in a supportive way. I love it when people come to me and open the conversation. I was so lucky as to have a conversation at work earlier this week where one of the members of my team, we were talking about what they needed to do, and I shared with them that, well, you haven't delivered that much, and I think you really need to get your team to deliver. And he graciously said, I know that. I know that one of our values at Amazon is deliver results, and I haven't really delivered results. So that was easy because he saw the problem and agreed. But when someone doesn't, and you have to lead them through it, and that's really hard. So that's just something I really struggle with. All right, bonus question, last one that's got 100 points here. What key inputs and skills are needed to manage upwards besides the adaptability trait? Communication. written communication. This is about managing up, so managing your leader. Even if you're an individual contributor, I think managing up is about communicating, but you're not going to be successful also if you don't understand what your manager's looking for. So if you come back to this broadcast, you'll hear from me a lot that managers love the question, what can I do to help you? And the only time they don't want to hear that question, what can I do to help you, is if what they need to tell you is, well, you can do your damn job because you're not doing it very well. But that's rare, hopefully. So if you're doing a good job, all managers love, hey, what can I do to help you? The point of this question, though, is you can ask it a slightly different way, which is, what do you need? What's important to you? What's our mission? It's easier to manage up if you know what's important to that leader, if you know their communication style, and if you know their priorities. Because you can communicate. I talked early in this broadcast about the idea of being a chameleon and changing your style. You can communicate in their style. I have a peer on my current team who doesn't really like to read, and he doesn't like long documents. He prefers in-person interaction. So if I'm managing up, in this case that's sideways, but if I'm managing up to someone like that, I need to know, don't send them one of my trademark long emails. And I know BoardWorks and some other people who've worked for me in this channel know about my trademark long emails. That would be the wrong tool. With that person, I need to go see them and talk. So thank you all for spending a little bit over an hour of your time with me tonight. I won't hold us longer. I've really enjoyed this. But as I mentioned, my celebratory wine is waiting. I hope what you all will do is come back next Sunday. Our topic next week is going to be working well with executives, which actually fits well into this. What I've learned, though, is that people are afraid of executives. They're afraid, at least in some cases, of the power of our directness, of many of the things we do. It says, do you have a way to send out a calendar invite? Blast Washington. We do. Go to our website, which is www.theeasycoach.com, and our calendar is there, and you can get a Google invite, a Google Calendar invite right there. And we encourage you, please share it on social media. We benefit only from people like you. Thank you, Washington Jeremy. But our next topic is going to be working with executives. And I have done that. I can share some things I've done working all the way up with, obviously, Jeff Bezos, now richest man in the world. I've had both positive and difficult interactions there that I brought on. They make good stories. So I hope people come back next week. And with that, please follow us here. If you don't know how to do that, my bad. There's a little heart icon in the top right corner. Point up here somewhere. Should be above my finger somewhere. Follow us there. Turn on notifications. And other than that, a bunch of people, I appreciate all your thanks at the end of the stream. This has been a ton of fun. Really energizing. And I hope all of you have had a good time and you've been a great audience. So with that, we'll call it a night. Thanks to all my moderators. And all of you have a great evening and a great week doing good work next week.